there's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is Content Farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world.
Ајде, мајката!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
On Saturday, October 7, the terrorist group known as Hamas, which, quote, governs, unquote, the Gaza Strip, launched an all-out attack on Israel and the Jewish people. It was the worst attack on Israel in 50 years since the Yom Kippur War, and the greatest single-day loss of life amongst the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Israel has rightly declared war on the Hamas terrorists, and all hell is breaking loose, not only in Israel and the region, but around the world. This will have ramifications for all of us for years to come, if not longer. And Macedonia will be affected by this in ways too numerous to count right now. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin in Skopje, Macedonia.
Cvetin, on Friday the 6th of October, and we're recording this on Thursday the 12th, episode 162 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. But on Friday, October 6th, I went up into northern Arizona with my brother-in-law and another buddy to do one of our epic, 3-day, 2-night backpacking trips. And at the West Clear Creek Wilderness area, which is a small canyon up in northern Arizona that runs east-west for, about 45 miles, 70 kilometers. And when we got to the edge of the canyon, we lost cell phone coverage, which was nice. No internet, no cell phone. Hiked down to the bottom of the canyon Friday afternoon, set up camp,
cooking some meat.
Dinner. No, actually, my brother-in-law and my buddy are fishermen, and so they went out fishing. They didn't catch anything Friday, but Saturday, had breakfast. They went out fishing. They caught fish. They ate the fish. And then Sunday we come back up, and then we have cell phone coverage and internet, and found out what was going on. But it's kind of amazing to be gone for 48 hours and have no cell phone coverage or internet coverage, and then to come back up out of the wilderness, so to speak, and find out that all hell has broken loose. So we quickly got. I was surprised when my buddy Brian started checking his news and email and started talking about what was going on. At that point, it was 600 had been killed in Israel. Now it's up to 1,200. Probably, as we record this, probably 1,500 Gazans, as the Israeli army pounds positions in Gaza where the Hamas terrorists are hiding weapons. They hide them in mosques and schools and hospitals because that's what they do. They're terrorists. It's much like, and again, this is the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast, and we'll talk about ramifications for Macedonia, but much as the so-called NLA, Al Ahmeti and his terrorists did in 2001, taking off uniforms, blending in with the civilian population, all of these tactics, which terrorists around the world have always used for all time. We're really, to begin on this, Hamas, has to be wiped off the face of the earth. For our listeners that don't know or haven't already jumped on the interwebs to find out more, Hamas I think it was created in 87 or 88. It's an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And they had elections in the Gaza Strip in 2006, and Hamas won, and there have been no elections since then. And they are regarded as a terrorist organization by the Israeli government, the United States government, probably most of the European Union, if not all states, and others around the world. They are probably not designated as terrorists by, obviously not by Iran, Syria, North Korea, the rogue state, China, the rogue states of this world. But they are a terrorist organization. I think it's important to point out that, as even you see this war going on there, Israel is hitting back with bombings and softening up the positions and preparing for the ground war, that's where this thing is really going to take off. They've called up 360,000 reservists. They're going to send 300,000 reservists into the Gaza Strip, is my understanding, and go. It's going to be hand-to-hand fighting, and it's going to be messy and ugly. There's 100 to 150 hostages in Gaza that Hamas took in. They're going to be murdered one by one, and Hamas is going to put it on social media, film it. There's going to be Americans that are killed, beheaded probably on TV, and that's where this is going to get really, really ugly. The question is, what is Iran? Of course, Iran has been funding this and planning this, for 2 years, supporting Hamas and Hezbollah as well in the north, in Syria, in Lebanon,
I never understood how Iran got involved with the Palestinians, because they're Sunni, these are Shia. I can understand them attacking from the north, from Lebanon, but I always thought, I haven't been following this very closely. I used to do world news, so I knew a lot about Hamas, and I thought that they are close to Turkey. They are they were close to Egypt when Egypt was led by the Muslim Brotherhood. But, this is really interesting how everybody's tying it immediately to Iran. And I guess they were looking for a sponsor in some way.
Yes, well, and I think the interesting, so the Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, had a phone call with MBS Mohammed bin Salman, basically the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. Now, prior to this, there was Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is the largest of the Sunni states in the world, and the heavy in the region, and Iran is the heavy on the Shia side, as you say. They were moving towards rapprochement. As under Trump, there were a couple of Arab states that made peace with Israel. And of course, the big one was Saudi Arabia. Now, yesterday or the day before, I think it was, the MBS and Ayatollah Khamenei had a phone call. There is talk now of the two of them actually putting aside their differences, Shia Sunni, and uniting on behalf of the quote unquote Palestinians
against the Jews.
Against the Jews, yeah.
Well.
I mean, everything in the history of the world, everything comes down to the Jewish nation. And
let's unite against our actual opponent, the People's Liberation Front.
Exactly, People's Liberation Front, Judea.
Okay, it's too soon for jokes here, not really.
Yeah.
This is going to be a crushing morosity podcast, not much on the puns side podcast.
Yeah, it's so it will be very interesting to see how things line up in the Arab and of course Iran is not Arab, Iran is Persian, and that's a big difference there. And to say nothing of Indonesia, which is neither Arab nor Persian, but it is Muslim and the largest Muslim country in the world. So it'll be interesting to see how the Arab nations and Muslims around the world react to this, especially once the ground war starts. But we've already seen how people have reacted around the world to this on behalf of Hamas. Now, I can understand people, saying, there are innocent Gazans and Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and they have died and they will die, and that's unfortunate. Hamas, though, started this war. They knew that there would be hell to pay. They came in, it was and just to kind of set the stage again, it was a kind of a peace rave, a music festival near the Gaza Strip, but in Israel, that Hamas invaded and slaughtered several hundred people there. Then they started going to the towns and villages and the kibbutzim, I think is the plural, around there, and wantonly murdering people, murdering babies. I have seen the pictures of the murdered babies now. I have forced myself to look.
They were just shared by the Israeli government.
And it is horrific. But going back to the reaction that we've seen here in America and around the world, amazing to me to see so many people standing in support of Hamas, not just the Palestinians but Hamas, and saying that they had every right to do this. I saw one Hamas supporter. I can't remember if she was in the UK or the US. She said, and this is interesting, and this is a theme that's going around. She said, when you kick an animal enough times, the animal strikes back. Well, 2 points. Number one, that is extremely condescending. These people, Hamas and the Palestinians, are not animals. To use that analogy and to say that they've been kicked too many times and they're striking back is to basically take away their humanity, take away their agency, and say that the only response that they have is Pavlovian, like a dog. So it's condescending. And then, and second, it does take away their agency. They had a choice. They made their choice. Now, the people of Gaza, the Palestinians there, have been under occupation basically, not by the Israelis, but by Hamas since 2006, when they were elected and never had elections after that. They could actually overthrow them. We have seen this in modern history, where an oppressed people have overthrown the government. And the case that comes to my mind immediately, because it's so visual, is Romania. And Ceausescu and his wife were literally gunned down by the Romanians. And the security state that supported Ceausescu and his wife obviously turned against them. But it is possible to overthrow a corrupt government. And it is possible for the Palestinians to overthrow Hamas. They haven't, for whatever reason. I think that's because they have a very different worldview. Interesting. Here's a quote from a senior Hamas official, Ali Baraka. The Israelis are known to love life. We, on the other hand, sacrifice ourselves. We consider our dead to be martyrs. This is a worldview from the Muslim world, not the entire Muslim world, but a large portion of it, that they are happy dying in the service of Allah, their God. Not our God, their God. It is, as the late Christopher Hitchens called it, Islamofascism, which I love. Again, going back to 9/11, and I think this is bigger than 9/11, to be honest, because I think this is I see so many nations and governments preparing to gang up on Israel in words and in deeds and actions. And then just ordinary people around the world, going back to what I was just mentioning there a minute ago about the response that we've seen in the US, the UK, and other places, especially elite universities. I'm sure you and our listeners have seen some of these idiot students at Harvard that signed a statement basically condemning Israel for this, putting all the blame on Israel for the murder, the rape, the kidnapping of Hamas, putting all the blame on Israel. And of course, now there's backlash, of course, against them because one of the students that signed that was a leader in one of the movements and apparently had a job offer from an elite law firm, and of course that's now been rescinded. So this student can now become a diversity officer in the United Nations, perhaps, or some other worthless group.
OSCE director in Macedonia.
Exactly. Yes, but the response has just been, there is so much Jew hatred out there. I'm even blown away by it, and I'm not surprised by many things, but they are just, people hate the Jews. People have always hated the Jews. The Jews have been the center of history since, for 4,000 years, since the first Jew. Although you can make now reaching back into biblical history, was Abraham the first Jew, or was Jacob, his grandson, the first Jew? Or was Isaac, his son, the first Jew? There's the patriarchs. There's Abraham, his son Isaac. Isaac is the father of of Jacob. Jacob's the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. But Isaac's brother was Ishmael. Ishmael's mother was Hagar, who was an Egyptian handmaid to Sarah, Abraham's wife.
Wait, I'm still writing this down, okay?
So
I don't really know this stuff.
I do. So I do, because I've been studying it for 50 years, half a century.
Yeah.
And I am older than 50 years. So anyway, so this has been going on since the beginning of the Jewish nation, Jewish people who, and I don't mean to make this into a theological discussion, but people hate the Jews throughout all of history. Now, with the Nazis, they were not Islamofascists, but they were fascists. But this is Islamofascism, as the late Christopher Hitchens calls it. And we saw it on 9/11. We see it now. We've seen it in various places around the world in between 9/11 and now. We'll see it in the future. course, I don't know if we're going to be able to get this out today, Thursday the 12th, or it'll go out tomorrow, Friday the 13th. Hamas and Arabs and Muslims around the world are calling for basically a day of rage.
Yeah, tomorrow is going to be ugly.
Tomorrow's going to be bad. Yeah, tomorrow's going to be bad. And we'll see. But again, and I keep saying again, going back to, and I'll stick on it this time maybe for a few more minutes, the response. I saw a meme going around about the U.S. Congress. There's a number of idiots in the U.S. Congress that are part of the Hamas caucus, as they're calling them now. The squad, Ilhan Omar, who is Somali, but Rashida Tlaib, who is Palestinian. And Rashida Tlaib, incredible. She has a flag of Palestine in front of her office.
She's Palestinian, right?
Yes, she's Palestinian. She has a flag of Palestine in front of her office, and then she has an LGBTQWXYZ Two-Spirit flag next to that. Yeah. And I'm blown away by how stupid these people are.
Yeah, there was a Babylon Bee joke this morning that the Talib's Palestinian flag threw the gay flag from the building.
Well, I was seeing some of the George Takei, Mr. Sulu in Star Trek, of course, who was a big LGBT activist. He made some stupid comment, and then lots of people pushed back against him. I don't know if he was ratioed or not, but my favorite pushback against him was a stick figure of George Takei being thrown off the building. So in Gaza. So it's just kind of amazing how stupid these people are.
That part is really magnificent to watch. That's the only segment where I allowed myself to be a little bit snarky in the comments now, because you see that the leftist coalition includes some very liberal Jews from the U.S. and they're shocked. And people, somebody was dragging the guy from ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, who is now obviously shocked by the
Jonathan
fresh
Greenblatt?
out of something like that. Yeah. Freshly out of the fight with Elon, proving that the whites are racist, that Elon has allowed Twitter to become a safe harbor for racist, anti-Semitic whites. And, again, it shows up that that's the least of his problem, his people's problem, Israel's problem, and that the actual issue is, this coalition of ethnic minorities throughout Europe. It's the Muslim minority through Europe. In the US, it's the black-brown minorities who, surprisingly have a lot, after Kanye especially, he woke us to the issue that they also have a serious issue with anti-Semitism. And the other part of their coalition is the upscale, liberal, usually women professors, academia people in high positions of power and authority in government, in administration. So, and some of them are Jewish, and now they're rudely waking up that a lot of their voters, of their coalition partners against the Trumpkins, the right wing, the white Christian majority in both the U.S. and Europe are actually actively, if they don't want to kill them, they're actually pretty indifferent or even happy if they get killed by somebody. So it's this collapse of the coalition is really magnificent to look at.
It is, although I think, and especially once the ground war starts, we're going to see more and more idiots around the world in support of Hamas.
Of course.
So interesting. This just came across the Twitter sphere. Sorry, the X sphere, whatever we're calling it nowadays. Henry Kissinger. I know a lot of our listeners absolutely despise Henry Kissinger. I think he is, whatever you think of him, he's been around a long time and he's seen a lot of things that we have not seen. And so he does have wisdom. But interesting comment he's commenting about the Arab migrants in Germany celebrating Hamas. He says, quote, "It was a grave mistake to let in so many people of totally different cultures and religions and concepts because it creates a pressure group inside each country that does that." He's right. You can disagree with the man on many things, but he's right on some things. So
this was fun for me. When I was during the Colored Revolution, went to Budapest throughout the Balkans. We were recording commentators on Soros, on Soros's network in the Balkans, and we were being, everybody who would criticize Soros were accused of anti-Semitism, even though my first exposure to actual mainstream anti-Semitism in my life in reputable print media were actually journalists either closely or loosely affiliated with Soros during the Iraq War. When you remember when there were mass attacks against the Jews who would be in the neocon movement, who would support the Iraq War, and I remember like you could easily read this in I can't at the moment quote from, I have to look up examples, but the New York Times, the Washington Post, you could easily see examples of people overemphasizing names like Wolfowitz, Elliot Abrams, Bill Kristol, all the neocon Jews. So, Soros was very active in spreading anti-Semitism, but against the right-wing Jews at the time. Now, many of them are left-wing, so, do with that what you may, or their supporters now are left-wing. But I remember we went to Budapest, we would record the commentators, and we went to the place where Orban's government had built a monument to this short period when Hungary was went from tried to break with the Germans and then was quickly occupied by the Germans, and this is when actually I believe most of the Holocaust in Hungary occurred, and they had a monument, and then the Jewish community in Budapest and the liberals, the Central European University types, they were all up in arms against the monument. They accused Hungary of diminishing its role in the Holocaust, so they would put like shoes, like memorabilia from, is that okay word? I guess artifacts from the Holocaust, kids' toys around the monument to accuse Orban of anti-Semitism, and there were several guys who would protest there all the time, and I spoke to one of them, and this was at the height of the migrant wave, and he said, I'm from the Jewish community, Orban is horrible, we have to do something about him, and then in the end, unfortunately I didn't catch this on camera, we stopped rolling, and I say, okay, but what's your feeling about the migrants now? Orban is trying to stop them, and if he doesn't, if they establish themselves more in Budapest, who they come knocking for at one point, sooner or later. And, he sighed and he said, well, I'm liberal in all regards, including this one, but I have to tell you a lot of the Jews in Budapest break with me on this issue, and they like Orban because of the border wall. So this was a very interesting, one of the more interesting interviews I had in my life.
Yes. Well, let's kind of pivot now to Macedonia, because Macedonia has a small Jewish community. I think it's important to remember that most of the Jews in Macedonia were sent to death camps in the Holocaust by the Bulgarian fascist occupiers. Now, Bulgaria, of course, this is one of the big issues that Bulgaria has with Macedonia is they hate being called fascist or occupiers or having anything to do with killing the Jews of Macedonia. But there is a small Jewish community. There's a synagogue there.
They saved their Jews because of the outcry of the deportations from Macedonia and North Aegean Macedonia. So the Jewish community and honorable people in Bulgaria got together and stopped the deportations from Bulgaria proper. But that's why it's an issue. Bulgarians have been accustomed to say that they, to learn in schools that they saved their community. But on the other hand, this part, I don't know how well it was represented in their schools to this point.
And one thing I've always loved about Macedonia, and this occurred under the previous government, is that there is a Holocaust museum and a museum to the victims of communism less than 100 meters apart in Skopje. Not too many capital cities have that.
And we had Gunther visiting the museum and crapping all over the Jewish partisans.
Wow!
Did you catch that?
No, I didn't. I missed that. When was that?
Oh yeah, he was at the museum, and he was saying how we are overemphasizing the communists' role, the partisans' role in liberating the country, and some guys some historians actually, reputable people, were commenting, oh, look, Ginter went to the Museum of Macedonian Struggle. He is trying to do some history revisionism. But actually, somebody told me, and I looked it up, it actually turned out to be true. He was not in the museum, in the anti-communism museum. He was in the museum of the Holocaust. And he was obviously he took a selfie in front of a picture of partisans, and he was dunking on them like their struggle was no big deal. But then actually it was the Jews who fled from the arrest, from the internment, and joined the partisans, obviously, near Bitola, and they were part of a partisan unit, and this was depicted in the Holocaust Museum. And we had Ginter, our Austrian friend, dunking on Jewish partisans.
Wow. Yeah, he's Gunther Fellinger, I think is his name, that we've talked about before in previous podcasts.
This is glorious.
A bit of a gadfly. What has been the reaction this past week in Macedonia?
Very, very reserved, very quiet. I didn't see almost anything from the Albanians, honestly. We saw the Albanians obviously they're sensing that the public sensibility will be turning against the Muslims after these horrific massacres, and Albanians are Sunni Muslims. So Albania and Kosovo, the prime ministers, immediately condemned this. There were some, I think it was a fake photoshopped picture that Albanians in Skopje posted Palestinian flags on an overpass in Chair, where the Bulgarian fans were stabbed like a few months ago. Remember that incident?
Yeah.
I drove by there. They were not there, I guess, photoshopped. We'll see tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday, the mosque, the prayers, and we'll see if there will be some reaction or if they'll try to play it safe and play it cool. Obviously, the population, the public, is more sympathetic with the Palestinians, but the political elite, the media, everybody knows that their lives at this point, obviously their political fortune and this unprecedented level of power and influence in the region that the Albanians have accumulated depends on remaining on the U.S. good graces. So they would not do anything to provoke, to remind anybody that they're Muslims. So there is this, we sense, discrepancy between the Albanian elite and the Albanian population. But yeah, we'll see tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the political parties, I think Besa is the only one that is, correct me if I'm wrong, is openly Islamist and aligned with Erdogan of Turkey.
Yeah, but also opportunist, honestly. So.
Sorry?
But also opportunist.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, and of course Ali Ahmeti is not. I don't even know what Ali Ahmeti is. I don't know if he's he's an atheist or a Muslim in name only, or a Grubi and people like that. So, but Ali Ahmeti is of course a terrorist. I find it interesting, kind of going back to the reaction. Some of the Hamas supporters are saying that was because Israel has cut off water, electricity, and fuel to Gaza, and people are saying that's a war crime. No, it is not a war crime. It is it's a legitimate. It's necessary, and it's a legitimate tactic in war where a terrorist state, and Hamas is recognized as a terrorist organization, where a terrorist organization attacks a legitimate state, and Israel is a legitimate state, and it is a tactic used to soften them up to prepare, for the wider ground offensive. And the so-called NLA in 2001, one of the so-called commanders cut off water in Lipkovo, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was a terrorist tactic.
Lipkovo, they cut the water to Kumanovo. They conquered
Kumanovo.
the Lipkovo reservoir. And,
that's right,
a city of 100,000 was left without water in the peak summer as a siege tactic, practically.
Yeah. Well, and again, this is something that we've talked about before, I've written about, etc., and we'll talk about it again, I'm sure, is that Ali Ahmeti and the war criminals, part of the NLA, were never prosecuted for their war crimes. I mean, they didn't just commit murder; they committed and wound people. They were responsible for kidnapping, sexual abuse, mutilation of bodies, torture, and of course they have been responsible for, in the funding of their organization, trafficking in women, girls, drugs, arms, all of these things, and they've never been held accountable for it. And you know, they will be accountable one day, if not in this life, then the next. But,
and in instances when, you know, they would carry out actual Islamist attacks on Macedonians, such as the 2012 Good Friday massacre of 4 children and 1 adult, we had our left-wing media, we had obviously the Albanian media, and we had, you know, U.S. government-funded media outlets out there accusing us of planting a false flag, carrying out a false flag operation. And to this day, 2 of the 3 killers, Albanian Islamists, one is in prison, 2 of them are free in Kosovo. They get periodically arrested by Kosovo police for other violations, like one had a traffic accident, and this is how we learn about this, that he was arrested, and it goes to court. The court re-examines the Macedonian deportation, you know, extradition warrant, and just throws it out after a while. So these guys have lived for 10 years in Kosovo without any problems falling on their head. And, you know, we had, I mean, this is going to become important. It's already showing up with regard to Israel, and it will continue to show up as the operation progresses. We had a similar approach from our left, Albanians, and the U.S. media and, you know, propagandists here in the country. Also over the 2015 attack on Kumanovo, which was again blamed on the Macedonian government, that we carried out a false flag operation, because at the moment Gruevski was facing a colored revolution provoked by the US and the left and the Albanians. So yeah, I guess we'll be seeing something like this in Israel, which was also facing a colored revolution against Netanyahu, also supported by the US government. And yeah, this was the second instance where I got a little snarky on the social media when some of the left-wing colored revolution types in Macedonia were, they're confused where to go. We are confused. I mean, nobody is sure how enthusiastic to be about, you know, turning Gaza into a parking lot, or, you know, maybe counter-accusing, I don't know, the Israelis of false flag operations or something like that. So people are, you know, the usual propaganda machines and bot networks do not have clear marching orders at this moment. But some of the leftists would say, you know, would support strong Israel. They burned babies. Hamas needs to be destroyed. And these were the same types who were, when it happened literally in their own country, when children were killed, you know, youngsters, teenagers were killed by Islamists, they came up with crazy conspiracy theories against the government, only to get the Albanian votes. And we actually had a prime minister and their leader at the time who actually accused the government of this and promised that he will reveal evidence that the attack was staged, the 2012 Good Friday massacre, and then he never did, and eventually acknowledged that he has no evidence. So there is also going to be a lot of this down the pipeline in Israel, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That, well, and not only that, but when the Albanians blew up some of the monasteries in I can't remember the name, which monastery it was.
Matice and Lešok. Matice was desecrated. They would carve images and used magic marker on the frescoes, and Lešok was blown up.
Right. Again, Islamofascism, as the late Christopher Hitchens called it. That's what this is. That's what it is, and it is growing. You know, around the world, and you know, these next few days or weeks. I don't know when the ground war is going to start. I think it's going to start soon. They're I've got to prepare for it. It's going to be ugly, but that's going to, the reaction is just going to be, again, this is bigger than 9/11, and the world has changed, and it won't be the same after this. So, but back on Macedonia, so we talked a little bit about some of the reaction, kind of muted. We'll see how that changes in the coming days. Some other news from Macedonia. So why don't you mentioned Gordana?
Yeah, we have a Macedonian news podcast here. And everything pales obviously in comparison to opening a second front in the World War III that we're having. But so the big news here is that so SDSM at this point is now openly rooting for Gruevski, hoping that he will actively working to maybe even bring him back in the country, or at least provoke him into going into confrontation with Vemera. Again, we discussed last episode, even the law that was passed that might help him a little bit, might help other people around him. Whether he was involved into this or not, this is hotly debated. But even if he wasn't, the government is making sure to leave an appearance that he is in cahoots with them, and that there was a poll recently. There were two polls, one commissioned by the Macedonian site, which is kind of middle of the road, showing Vemera demolishing SDSM in the elections. And then immediately on the same day, in a coordinated, counter poll prepared by an agency which was receiving funding from the government, so it's pro-government, pro-SDSM. They had two separate lists from Vemera. So they had Vemera Christian Mickovski and Vemera Nikola Gruevski, a Gruevski list.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, Gruevski has not said that he's setting up a party. Skopje Mayor Daniela Arsovska said that she will set up a party, and Gruevski is accused of secretly supporting her. He has not openly endorsed it. But, the poll shows that Vemera split in half, and this shows SDSM winning. So this is the game played by the government now, which is very ironic considering all the persecution and attempts to arrest, or worse, Nikola, that they are now hoping. They literally had billboards during past elections. If you don't vote for the referendum, or if you don't vote for SDSM, Gruevski will return to the country. And now they're openly hoping that he will actually return to the country and will be in a fight with Mickovski, not turn on them. But there is some good news, somewhat linked to these developments, that former Interior Minister Gordana Jankulovska will be released from prison in a couple of weeks. She has been in prison for almost 3 years on a ridiculous charge of corruption after the ministry purchased an armored vehicle, which obviously you need to have for transportation of high visiting dignitaries. The money were not stolen. They bought a Mercedes, which is, the customary brand you buy here. There is not much competition. You can't, buy a Volga for this purpose. But yeah, she was put in prison for this shortly after she gave birth to her baby boy, and was kept in prison for 3 years as deterrence, as literally a political victim. Recently, she was allowed some time off, and she met with Mickovski, and she had an interview with a U.S. government-funded media outlet. So we were looking into this closely to see that, is she picking a side? Is she going to, turn on Gruevski or on Mickovski, using her position as a high-level political prisoner in this country, which even people on the left say, this is ridiculous that we're keeping her in prison. Well, all other promises of rule of law and, truth and reconciliation are collapsing around us. But she didn't really say much. She was reserved in her comments, a little, obviously, snarky on Gruevski, who, fled the country, and with this, obviously, made things worse for her, worse for other people who who faced a similar level of political persecution. But yeah, she will be released, so this would leave us with still a lot of other political prisoners arrested. Miliana Kievsky has since been put in prison after spending years in house arrest. Obviously, there is Jana Chinto and a dozen other political prisoners with the incident in the parliament, which at the moment left-wing people are openly negotiating, not with them, but offering them as pawns in if VMRO votes for the amendments with Bulgaria in a horrific violation of human rights and any decency. Literally holding people hostages.
Yeah.
I even compared them to the Nordonian Hamas. I couldn't even call them Macedonian version of Hamas. These people, they don't deserve to be called Macedonians. The left-wing supporters in Macedonia who are holding decent people prisoners, used them once to change the constitution with regard to Greece and now with regard to Bulgaria. So, this is where we stand. We have actual polls showing ASDSM demolished and ASDSM trying to counteract this by hyping Gruevski up and hoping that he will turn on Mickovsky.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen. I hope that
VMRO is trying to reduce the level of confrontation with Gruevski. Now they stopped calling him out, even though they started it. I mean, Mickovsky started this. Now he stopped calling him out. Gruevski has also stopped initiating. He's not initiating comments on his part, so it's kind of quieting down this confrontation.
Good. I mean, yeah. There's always going to be disagreements within the family, whether it's VMRO there or the Republican Party here. We want to keep those disagreements and behind the scenes. Every family has disagreements. Let's keep those quiet and try and work those out, because we don't need to be divided in the face of in Macedonia's case, the former or current communists of Citasa and the former or current communists / terrorists of Dewey. Speaking of which, then, that leads us, maybe we can wrap up here with the last thing, just a brief touch on the elections. I know Mickovsky keeps calling for early elections, and at some point it's going to be too late for early elections. So we have parliamentary and presidential elections next year at some point. VMRO wants them together. The government wants them apart. Atala Jaferi, who himself is actually a terrorist, dereliction of duty, left the Macedonian army in 2001 and went to fight, quote unquote, fight for the so-called NLA. He's a terrorist. So he said, yes, the only time we can have elections together happens to be on Orthodox Easter Sunday. I think he's doing that as on purpose. I think he's saying that because he knows that Macedonians don't want to have elections on Easter Sunday, and he's doing it because he's a total bastard. But what are the options now for elections?
Yeah, he came out. I mean, this is going to be another thing to look at, other than trying to divide VMRO. There will be different tactics to discourage voters. One is to declare all the passports and identity cards invalid if they don't have the name North Macedonia on them, right just before the elections.
Wow.
And there are huge lines in Skopje where people can't register to have new documents issued. It's also a substantial financial expense for many. And there is talk that the government will try to prioritize their people, that they will be able to get a date for the, having a picture taken and issuing the documents, while denying this to known VMRO supporters, so that people will not be able. In this country, we actually need to show ID to vote. I mean, I know it's a strange concept to US and American, but we try to identify the people who vote, that they're actual citizens. Last election we had Corona was used to discourage turnout, and now a new idea, as you said, is Jaferi coming out and saying, well, we can't possibly coordinate the elections at the same time, the presidential and the general elections. We could only possibly do this on Easter, so this in their mind would also help reduce turnout from pro-opposition voters. So there's going to be a lot of this type of tricks in the coming period.
Lovely. We may not get to that point, Cvetin. There may not be an election there or here or anywhere else. If things go really, really bad. But we'll see. And
we may be busy driving refugees to Germany as fast as we can.
Exactly. So from
the Middle East.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do this. I've got to get out of here and get to a client event. Get this up as quickly as we can, and we may be having another podcast sooner rather than later, depending on how events go in Israel and the Middle East, and for that matter, around the world. So,
and possibly a third front in the Balkans, which is always an opportunity. We were actually close to this with Serbia, Kosovo.
That's true. Yeah.
A few weeks ago.
All right, we'll keep following it. Good catching up with you, Sven.
Yeah. You too, buddy. Take care.
You too.